Well, hey now, everybody. It's The Rob from 106.1 KISS FM here with my tag team partner in podcasting. Say hello to the beautiful, luscious Jerry V. Good morning, Jer.
Ho!
Look at you.
How you doing, tough guy?
I saw some of your pictures from Friday at the Spikes game. Looks like you guys had an awesome time.
We had a great time. I'm really proud of this puppy. I took a 2x4 to the ballpark. They weren't letting anyone else do this, but I do work for the baseball team, so I was the MC that night. So I had more access to Hacksaw Jim Duggan than others, and I had him sign it, and it's awesome. He signs it, to Jerry and Evan, best wishes, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Hall of Fame 2011. Oh, like he took time with everybody. He was such a nice dude.
That's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. Is he all the way there? Do you get the feeling he's all the way there?
Absolutely. I feel like he is more lucid and intelligent than you would ever have guessed from television. He was very frank and upfront about a lot of things that we talk about. It took him 0 minutes to realize that I was more than like, hey, I remember you on ice cream bars. I was bringing up the Slammies and him fighting Harley Race the whole way through the place. And I was bringing up the Royal Rumble and how I thought it was interesting that first one wasn't even on a pay-per-view. And we talked about
that first one is the one he won, right?
Yes, absolutely. We talked about podcasts. He said he'll give ours a listen if I give his a listen. So I'd like to go ahead and say Hacksaw Jim Duggan has, it's called Prime Time with Hacksaw and Mooney. He does one with Sean Mooney.
You're kidding me. I didn't know Mooney was doing a podcast.
Mooney and Hacksaw do a podcast together, and it's a lot like Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard, where they just talk about the era of wrestling Duggan was in.
I thought Mooney was always underrated, but my understanding was he kind of left wrestling behind him.
Yeah, well, no, he does it, and I heard a little bit of it this weekend, and it was good. And so, I don't know if we'll give that a boost or anything, but I told Hacksaw I'd mention it, and so there I did.
You think there's any chance they're actually listening to us today?
I doubt it, but it was cool. And I asked him questions like, I wondered if the board he used was gimmicked. He said it was. He said it wasn't at all. He said they took stiffer shots in the 80s, is what he said.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like you never saw it break. I feel like it'd be really tough to gimmick a 2x4.
Yeah, you could bake the wood. Like those martial art tournaments where they're breaking all this wood. If you bake the wood, you can make it a little more. But he was never breaking boards. Yeah. They were never breaking. They didn't give.
Interesting. Well, hopefully Hacksaw decided to give us a listen today. And if you did, thanks, tough guy.
Hey, tough guy. I actually asked him for some insight for our topic today.
Really?
I asked him because he was asking me who are your favorite wrestlers now and who don't you like. And I was like, it's interesting you ask who I don't like. I said, in the podcast we're going to talk about, the topic is most hated wrestlers backstage. And we'll get into it more here, but it's inspired by Enzo and Baron Corbin being on the outs in the locker room right now. And I asked him if there was anybody when he worked. And he said, I'm going to try to be diplomatic, and we'll just say some people were harder to work with than others. And then he said Randy Savage wasn't always easy to work with.
I've heard that.
He said the Ultimate Warrior wasn't always easy to work with.
I put neither of these guys on my list? I'm kicking myself because they're absolutely.
And then he said he was a sweetheart, and and I loved him, and he loved me. But if he didn't love you, you hated André the Giant.
André. Yeah. First of all, if you were a big guy, like a giant size kind of guy, you had a huge mountain to climb getting André to like you, is my understanding.
Right. And he goes on he was telling my son about how he André the Giant. He was like, I was 310 pounds and I was on the gas back then. So he's telling Evan that he's on steroids. He was like, I was on the gas and he'd hit me with his hand and it would throw me across the ring. So I guess André the Giant was a tough nut to crack, but if he liked you, he loved you.
Yeah, I also wouldn't say that he was resoundingly hated. Now, Ultimate Warrior, definitely. Randy Savage is a mixed bag. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with one of yours because I really.
Well, I was thinking between those two.
Oh, between those two, let's start with the Ultimate Warrior because he was my favorite growing up.
Ultimate Warrior was just a lunatic. Ultimate Warrior kind of lived the gimmick. Ultimate Warrior was definitely a guy who thought he was better than everyone else in the locker room, notoriously. Ultimate Warrior is a guy I saw speak at Penn State. His legal name at the time was Warrior. This was during his it was a homophobic, anti-Islamic kind of.
Yeah, these were the Warrior University days.
It was, yeah. In fact, for a long time before I got into radio, if you Googled my name, the first thing that would come up would be Ultimate Warrior's actual page. And the reason that was because I sent a review of his speech at Penn State to Dave Meltzer at the Wrestling Observer, who then took what I wrote and wrote about it in his newsletter. And then Ultimate Warrior copied and pasted that onto his Warrior site. So for a long time, if you Googled me, that was what you would see. I was kind of writing about it from like I'm certainly not like a right. I consider myself pretty down the middle. Lately I tend to lean a little more left, but I wouldn't say I'm liberal or even a Democrat, to be honest with you. But I didn't like what he was saying. He had a lot of, I remember queering is not the way was the direct line from one of his speeches.
Oh my God, really?
Absolutely. And was just talking about how people of like, I want to say it was a long time. This was like 2004.
Well, he went off the rails after wrestling, but was he off the rails during wrestling? Like I've heard he was careless with people's bodies. So like he wasn't fun to work with.
And also don't forget that he held Vince up for money at a SummerSlam. He was the world champion at the time. This was 92, I think. And he was going to work with Savage, but not unless you paid him. I think it was money that he felt he was owed, but Vince didn't feel he was owed it. And he said, if you want me to perform, you're going to have to pay me like $100,000 tonight or I'm not going. And yeah, he was a guy. Yeah, he had that. I mean, just watch that DVD that got him so upset when he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. The what was it? The Rise and Fall of the Ultimate Warrior, I think it was called.
Yeah.
I mean, you just
self-destruction.
That's what it was. Thank you. Everyone's there just kind of saying these awful things about him. And my understanding was that was kind of what it was like working with Warrior.
They did that hit piece, but then after he passed away and he made nice with them in the Hall of Fame, and they did another DVD for him that was kinder.
They've done two since then that were kinder. Neither one of them nearly as fun to watch as the Self-Destruction, but they're there.
And I always loved the Ultimate Warrior, but I can see in hindsight why he would have been a nightmare to work with. Randy Savage, I was a little surprised to hear that he was hard to work with. I wonder what he meant by that. I didn't get a lot of time to pick his brain because Randy was careful in the ring. Randy didn't hurt people. Randy wasn't hard in that sense.
So Randy was kind of in a different situation. And the big thing about Randy was how protective he was over Liz. And to be fair to Randy, all the other guys didn't have their wives in the locker room or their loved ones in the locker room. So he would seclude Elizabeth from everybody else, keep her locked sometimes in a closet. Usually she'd get a locker room, but didn't want anyone talking to her, looking at her. And then Randy was also...
Was it because he was jealous? Like he didn't want to get Chris Candido'd before that had ever happened?
I just think he didn't trust the guys. And I think that his mentality was that anyone would sleep with her if they got the chance. And some of them did, after the fact, my understanding.
After, not during though, right?
It's my understanding, but who knows?
Yeah.
And then also when it comes to in the ring, Savage was kind of like one of those geniuses in the fact that if you ever meet like a real life genius, there's something a bit off about them. And Savage had that in real life and in the ring. And Savage was also one of the very few guys who was notorious for writing his matches out before they happened. And you can say positive and negative things about that. A lot of the guys didn't like to do it. One opportunity that he got to do it was with Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. And Ricky didn't want to do it that way, but he let Savage write out a match for them. And to be fair, many people call that the greatest match that's ever happened. So he had a method to his madness, and he didn't underthink what he did. But a lot of people, it's kind of like jazz. Let's just go in there and have a good match. Whereas Randy is trying to make sure everything's perfect. And
I heard, not to always bring it back to Bruce Pritchard, but I heard him talking about Dusty Rhodes, and he said that Randy did that in their WrestleMania match, and it upset Dusty, but Randy was like, whatever, we're doing it.
Yeah, and that was the thing. That was kind of Randy's mentality, is this is what we're doing, and it wasn't, do you want to work this out? It was, this is what we're doing. But to be fair, the product and the outcome, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. Those matches he wrote out, hold for holds, are awesome.
Yeah.
So
so those were Hacksaw's picks in a roundabout way.
Yeah. So I've got a few that I wrote down, and I'm assuming you've got a few. You want to kick one off?
Yeah, I'm going to say one, and I'm curious what you think about it, because I feel like you could pick any member of this group, but I'm going to go with Shawn Michaels. I think Shawn Michaels had a lot of heat on him backstage if you weren't Vince McMahon or the Clique.
I think Shawn Michaels is the actual right answer. Or you could say Shawn Michaels 88 through 90. Okay, let's go 88 through 2002. Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. You really could. There was an era though when he and Razor and Diesel and Triple H, they were running roughshod over everybody.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Clique were heat seekers for sure. But Shawn, you won't get people saying that about X-Pac or Razor for the most part. And Triple H, I think, was somewhat recent, at least DX stuff, after Nash and Hall had already left. Nash, I think you're only going to hear that from people who worked under him in WCW when he had the books, which he should have never had to begin with. Shawn, though, if you worked with Shawn in the 90s, my understanding was he was a grade A-hole.
Oh, yeah.
And it is my favorite thing to learn about. Like, there's certain topics that I just enjoy. Like, I like seeing anything about Chris Benoit. I like seeing anything about Owen Hart. And I like seeing things about Shawn being a jerk in the back in the 90s.
Plenty of stories.
If you read Bret Hart's book, if you read Hardcore Holly's book, if you read Sonny's book, anyone who worked with Shawn, except for the Clique, have the most rotten things to say about how he was to work with in the back. But again, it's so interesting in a Randy Savage kind of way, because many people would say it, and at the time I would say he was number 2 of all time, but many people would argue he's the best to ever do it. So you kind of forgive a little bit of it.
Well, when you say the best of all time, he's number 2, you're number 1 at that time of all time, Bret Hart. He wasn't loved in the locker room either, except by his tight group.
I feel like it's nothing compared to Shawn.
Yeah.
You didn't get Bret being a jerk. You just got Bret taking everything really seriously. I think was kind of the big complaint about Bret. Bret was kind of stuck in his ways. His ways were very old school, but I wouldn't put Bret on this list personally. You do hear a lot of people not like him nowadays, but I feel like that's kind of post-career. He's been kind of bitter and sour and kind of outspoken about it. But I think during this actual heyday, and anyone feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think people, for the most part, liked working with Bret.
It's almost like a role reversal, because when you were in their day in the locker room, Shawn was the one that the boys hated. And now later, with all the bitterness and the Montreal Screwjob and all that stuff, Bret might not be hated, but he's the one that they don't love as much. And Shawn, everybody's kind of welcomed back because Shawn is, goofy old rancher Shawn now.
Well, he wasn't fighting for his life when he came back in 2002 through the end of his career. Like, he had already proven himself. He wasn't really in title contention almost ever, and he didn't really care. He was happy to put people over. I heard he was still a big jerk in the back. I've heard that from actual people who were back there with him. And but still not the way he was before, in that he was, I don't know, the whole Jesus thing has been up for debate too. A lot of people think it's sincere. A lot of people think it's not. But that maybe that changed the way he looked at life.
Just now, he just seems like they're like, go out dressed up like Colonel Sanders for SummerSlam.
Well,
he's like, okay.
He probably got a pretty payday, I would think, from KFC to do that. So I
assume so.
If a certain restaurant tells me to say I like their food, they're going to pay me to say it. Where do I sign? Dress me up like this. I'll dress up like the chicken if you need me to.
I'll be like Will Ferrell did on Conan and dress up like Little Debbie.
I'll do whatever exactly.
Whatever. So I feel like I took your top answer. What answers do you have? What are some of the ones you have?
All right. Well, we can breeze over these two since we covered them last week. I just want to mention that this conversation got started because of supposedly real life things happening with Enzo Amore and Baron Corbin. I filled everybody. If you don't know why Enzo is hated so much in the background, I did my best to fill everybody in. Do you think I covered that pretty well last week? You did.
I think we covered it very thoroughly. I went back and I watched 205 Live. I'll say this, Enzo Amore is the only reason I've watched 205 Live since it started. So in a way, he does a boost for that show. But if it just becomes Enzo on 205 Live and that's the only place you see him, he's about to get buried.
I think he's about to get buried. I don't think we're going to see him tonight on Raw. And if we do, I don't think we're going to see him on Raw for much longer.
If you see him tonight on Raw, I bet you see him getting killed by Neville.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't exactly know. Well, you know what? Yeah, the 205 guys still do drift over onto Raw. So I don't think he'll be exclusively there, but who knows? And then Corbin, I don't know enough about to really comment on, but I just know that the heat is there. I just don't really know why. Let's start at the top. A guy who is somewhat justly and somewhat unjustly hated is Hulk Hogan. And it's easy to, he's certainly an easy target to be hated by the boys. But I do feel like some of it is undeserved. Do you have thoughts about Hulk?
When you're the man that long, it's hard not to deal with a little bit of resentment and jealousy.
But he also, I mean, he was a guy who was kind of one of the boys. While he did make 10 times the money of the rest of the boys and get Hollywood treatment, he was pretty giving some of the times with the other guys. Now, again, that depends on who you ask. A lot of people have rotten things to say about Hulk. I was listening to a great story from the Pritchard podcast just this weekend, from one of the Undertaker podcasts. I love that story about Hulk trying to bury Undertaker in real life after SummerSlam 91. Do you know that story?
I don't know that story.
So Undertaker had heat with Hulk Hogan up until Hulk's return in 2002 because Undertaker got his first brush with the main event in 1991. He had a match with Hulk Hogan at Survivor Series. And if you remember, it led to a rematch just a few days later at Tuesday in Texas.
Yes.
So if you watch that match, Hulk takes a tombstone from the Undertaker onto a chair. When Hulk gets to the back, he's all sour and complaining to Vince that Undertaker didn't protect him on the tombstone. There is video footage. Obviously, this was a pay-per-view. And everyone went back and watched the match, including Undertaker, including the higher-ups. It is so incredibly safe. Hulk comes nowhere near his head hitting the ground or the chair. That, but I guess the point of the story was it still hurt Undertaker. You know, it kind of like a guy who gets accused of being a raper, but then he's found not guilty in the court of law. But you
too late. The court of public opinion's already made up their mind.
It took Undertaker a long time to get back to that level because Hulkster wasn't happy with them. And then Hulk goes away, and then it's Undertaker's yard, so to speak, in 2002. And apparently they had a nice little talking out in the back, but they eventually became buds, because they worked together when Hulk returned. So there was that. But then even Bret, like the WrestleMania 9 story with Bret is a doozy too, where like Hulk kind of stripped Bret of the title, promised Bret, I'll put you over sometime for the belt in the future, and then didn't want to follow suit on that one. I mean, there is a lot of examples of Hulk pulling his creative control card, which, we talked about before. I think if you're going to give it to someone, you got to let them use it, but he didn't have it in WWE or WWF. And just that was just kind of the Hulk's, that was his MO. He would pull that, he'd pull his wiener out, for lack of a better term.
Right. What do you think about putting JBL on the list?
Not on mine, but a great choice. He kind of got a revitalization of that with Morrow here recently, but it's, in my opinion, he is probably the biggest bully in the locker room. I'll say 98 through 2006, 7.
Yeah, I don't know how he's still a bully because he looks frail to me, and most of the guys would be like, "Shut up, JBL. You're not going to hurt me." But he was an ass kicker, and ask the Blue Meanie about JBL and how far he'll go to bully somebody. He beat him in the ring.
Yeah, I know some guys who have been in the locker room with JBL who have kind of personally been victimized of bullying. I'm not going to throw any stories out there, but it exists, and where there's smoke, there's fire with a lot of this stuff. And JBL, I am certainly convinced, was a bully.
Is a bully.
Yeah, and you say, why can he get away with it now? I mean, you know how respect works in the locker room. Those guys who have been around forever, you need to show them respect. And that bully stuff never got worked out of JBL.
Yeah, if he says something to you, tells you to do something, you have to do it because it's JBL.
Right, exactly. Other guys who've been kicked out of the locker room, I told you about Miz last week, and his kind of arrogance, and ultimately, my understanding was it was a story about eating a piece of chicken over a referee's bag that got him kicked out of the locker room, and for years and years and years until Undertaker welcomed him back in. We mentioned a few of these. I've got a few more here. Lex Luger was kind of roundly disliked in the locker room for several reasons too. Lex Luger was a guy who was kind of handpicked to be the next Hulk Hogan, and for a long time that made a lot of sense. Lex had the bodybuilder physique. He had Hollywood level good looks. He did not have the charisma, or you could even argue the ability that Hogan had. Never wound up working out, but he walked around as if he were the Hulk Hogan of the day. My understanding is there's a rumor, I forget if it's been proven or disproven, but was supposed to get the title from Yokozuna at SummerSlam, what was it, 93, I think, and was apparently bragging to people at a bar the night before that he was about to win WWF's title the next day. And eventually that news got out, and they decided to change their minds that day because Luger wouldn't shut up about winning the title.
Wow.
And, got his own tour bus for a while. And, he was, and again, didn't have the ability in the ring, really, just had the look to back it up.
Someone I have on the list, the Honky Tonk Man, I know was hated.
Great choice. Absolutely. He did one of the biggest a-hole moves in all of wrestling. Like when I think
he's one of the best heels. Have you noticed most of these hated people are great heels? Because I think they're just heels.
It's something you're born with. It's like some people just have the look of a heel.
So what was Honky Tonk's biggest move? I think I know what you're going to say, but I want to hear what you said.
Yeah. He held up the IC title.
Yeah.
And really changed the course of wrestling history because this is a pretty well-known story. I'm not blowing anyone's mind here, I don't think, but WrestleMania 4 was not supposed to be Randy Savage's night, so to speak. It was supposed to be a night for the $1 Million Man to win his first world title, which, when I say first, he never wound up winning that championship. So it really screwed him over in a lot of ways. But they wanted Randy Savage to win the they wanted, help me out. Who was it? He wouldn't put over. Oh no, it was Savage.
I don't remember the story.
It was
so
Savage.
You're on your own here.
He was supposed to put over Savage for the IC title at WrestleMania 4, but refused to do the job for whatever reason. DiBiase was supposed to win the world title tournament, and they needed to get Savage hot. They put the priority on him and decided to bypass Ted and give the title to Savage that night, all because Honky Tonk wouldn't do the honors to Randy Savage. And it's in my opinion that you don't hold up the promoter. You just don't.
You don't do that. He did the job for the Ultimate Warrior eventually in a hurry. I think in the following SummerSlam or whatever.
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, but he just didn't want to do it for Savage. I thought the Honky Tonk Man was a good one. And while now everybody looks back on him and what a sweetheart and he's revered, but when he first went to the WWE, Dusty Rhodes was not cared for. He was seen as cocky, and
Dusty Rhodes is he's my least favorite wrestler ever.
I do know that.
But I feel like the guys who had the book, it's almost a little unfair. Because you can say it about Ole Anderson, you can say it about Vince McMahon, you can say it about Eric Bischoff, you can say it about Flair, you can say it about, we already talked about Nash, but a lot of these guys, it's unfair because they're technically the boss at that point.
So when you have the book, you are going to be hated.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a lot of Dusty's heat came from booking stuff.
Right.
Here's a name I wrote on my list. Didn't know if you wanted to discuss it. I don't know how good of a place he deserves on this, but what do you think about Brock? Hold on, my headphones. Hold on, I can't hear you. My headphone kind of unplugged. Give me 1 second, please. All right, say it. What were we gonna say?
Okay, so Brock Lesnar is a very interesting one, I think, because he has real heat in the locker room, because I don't think he gives a crap about. We talked about the respect and the business, and everyone's always trying to protect the business, and everybody's trying to respect wrestling. And there's a fraternal brotherhood back there, with the wrestlers court, and there's just a lot of weird traditions that maybe we don't even fully grasp. And he gives a poop about all of it. He's about making money, showing up when he's paid to, winning championships. He'll bail into WWE to win a championship at UFC. He doesn't seem like one of the boys. He doesn't want to be one of the boys, and that probably rubs everybody the wrong way. Chris Jericho's a great example. He got into a big fight with him because he thought he went into business for himself and tried to kill Randy Orton at that SummerSlam.
Dude, you just gave an A+ induction, a better job than I could have done about why Brock is a heat seeker in the back. And then, so take everything that Jerry just said and multiply it by the fact that he makes so much more than everybody else. Multiply that by the fact that he gets the title with great ease and holds it for a long time. And then, every time you hear, the term part-timers being thrown around, how WrestleMania is about the part-timers and stuff like that, the Goldberg, they're talking about Brock.
He's a part-timer. He's just a part-timer with the belt. And I don't know this for a fact, but leading up to SummerSlam, I have a theory that his contract doesn't just limit the amount of appearances, but it limits the amount of appearances he makes during that appearance. It makes no sense for them to do one-and-done segments leading up to that fatal four-way where Brock Lesnar comes out once and then he doesn't show up again the rest of the night, even if everybody else is out there. And so I kept noticing it over and over and over again. And I think that he's got a deal where, when he shows up at a Raw, he shows up at a Raw once, and then he's probably left the building. He doesn't have to stick around.
I've never heard of that. I don't know. I don't want to say you're wrong. I'm just going to say I've never heard of a thing like that. It's a
hypothesis based on the fact that why in the freaking world would they book him to be on Raw and then have him involved with these three dudes and then not come out again later when they're out there, ever?
One thing I do want to say about Brock is, one thing you can't say about him is that he's willing to put people over. I almost think, and I might be out of line here, I'm thinking if Vince McMahon was like, Brock, your job tonight is to put over James Ellsworth, I think he just wants the paycheck.
I think that's awesome. He doesn't worry about winning the scripted fight. as much.
Yeah.
But I think he would have a problem with that. But I don't think he'll have a problem doing a job to Braun Strowman if he is supposed to.
Yeah.
I was surprised how he was losing to Goldberg, though. He really did favors for Goldberg.
He does what he's told. And when you're paying a guy that much, you should get what you want. You know what I mean?
That's more than Stone Cold Steve Austin did for him. I bring it up all the time.
You're right. You're right, and you're wrong. Again, Austin would say that he just wanted it done differently. But again, it does come down to the fact that you do what you're told. You're right. Do
the job, unless you have the book.
Let me see. I've got a few more names on here. I was trying to think of ones from outside of WWE. And for ECW, one name really jumped out at me as being roundly disliked. I don't know a whole lot about it, except for he was just supposed to be an arrogant prick, which is why he never lasted long anywhere. Mike Awesome was just supposed to be a prick that everyone hated.
But I'll tell you, I loved the Awesome Bomb.
And his matches with why can't I think of that guy's name? I was going to say Tajiri. Why can't I think of his name?
I don't know who you're talking about.
He had this feud with a Japanese guy, and I can't believe I can't think of his name right now. But
here we go.
Yeah, he had many
Masato Tanaka.
Thank you. That's the one I'm looking for. He had great matches with him, but man, there's the great story about how he held up isn't the right. Well, maybe it is. He went to WCW when he was ECW champion. And WCW granted him the right to go back to ECW to lose the title, which was a really historic night because do you know who he lost it to? Hey, I might be getting a little bit of a feedback, by the way. I don't know if you can turn me down or
go ahead.
Anything. Who? He lost it to Tazz, which was really interesting because WCW wrestler Mike Awesome dropped the ECW title to WWF superstar Tazz.
What a weird day.
But Mike Awesome wasn't allowed to change with the boys in the locker room. He had to change in a hotel and get driven to the arena right in time for his match, because if any of the guys saw him, allegedly they would have just beaten the crap out of him, and he had his bags ready to go. He left through the crowd, he didn't step foot in the back from what I understand.
The ECW guys did not like him.
They did not want to see him. They did not appreciate him.
Wow.
So I wanted to put that one down. Do you have more?
No, I feel like we've covered just about everybody. I guess you're right. I thought any member of the Clique could go on, but you could say that about any faction really when you've got a leader. I think we covered it with Shawn. Do you have any more?
I wrote down a few, but we don't need to go into those specifically. When it comes to the Clique, I bet you if you polled the guys, most of them would say they really liked Scott Hall, and same with Waltman. So yeah, there was that. I think we got a pretty good list going here. And obviously, I mean, my favorite part of Post to Post is how the show continues after it goes on Facebook. So
right.
Obviously we left some big names out, and if you want to talk about some big ones that are back there, names that I put on my list, there's the Bautista stuff. I remember that the big fight with Booker, that shoot fight in the back. My understanding was Bautista went through a phase where he was not well liked.
Bautista told us when he had lunch with us at Hooters that guy he was riding on the road with at the time, Randy Orton, found himself in hot water more than a few times.
Boy, you know what? Randy Orton probably deserves a space on this list. And then the other name I thought would be worth mentioning would probably be Sid, who actually, got into several fights, whether you want to talk about squeegees or scissors or whatever the weapon of choice will be. Sid always seemed to have a rough go wherever he was.
But you know who's not going on the list?
Who's that?
Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Oh, that's right.
What a sweetheart.
I'm glad that he didn't find any heat with you. We can go ahead and wrap this one up then if you want to, Jared, because I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes in the post show. Look at that beautiful 2x4.
Go for it, tough guy.
You want to sign off with a Hackfall promo, Jared?
There's only one person I'm afraid of, and he lives in Glen Falls, New York, and I call him Dad. Come and get it. tough guy. Ho!
Oh!
USA!
USA! USA! USA!